Okay, shall we get started? So I just wanted to say thank you all so much for joining us here today. This meeting is recorded, so that means you'll be able to see it on our website in a few days to a week, depending how long it takes. So you can rewatch parts and yeah, if people weren't able to get here today, then they can see it. So just because we have some new people here today, I wanted to just go over a quick introduction to our group. I know you've all signed up to us, so you've at least vaguely heard of us, but you might be new to what we do. So I just wanted to explain ILG Community is a volunteer-led organisation run by and for disabled people who use PAs to manage their care and support. Many of our members receive direct payments from local authorities or personal health budgets from the NHS and use this funding to employ their own PAs. But we also welcome those who work with self-employed or agency PAs, as well as those who run budgets on behalf of somebody else, and we cover the whole of the UK. And we exist to support and connect PA employers. So we offer peer-led guidance, we share knowledge and practical information, and help people navigate the complexities of managing their own care. And this includes understanding employment responsibilities, navigating changing guidance, and dealing with the funding processes that can often feel inconsistent or unclear. And we offer a range of free events on these kind of topics. Many of us, our ILG community, have been PA employers for years, and like others here today, I've experienced firsthand how empowering it can be to have choice and control over your care, but how difficult that has become to maintain that. Increasingly, disabled people are finding they're having to fight for basic support and challenge decisions they don't fully understand and justify every aspect of how they're living their lives. It is completely exhausting and it shouldn't be this hard. And we know local authorities, NHS bodies and national policymakers are under immense pressure too, and we appreciate the complexity of the system. But by working together and truly understanding the experiences of those of us that use the system every day, we believe we can find more transparent, consistent and fair approaches that work for everyone. And I also wanted to let you know about some of our upcoming events. So on Monday, the roadmap for the Independent Living Coalition has been hard at work over the past few months, developing a new roadmap for social care aimed at achieving true independent living. This is a comprehensive plan that outlines clear steps across the short, medium and long term. And we're excited to present the roadmap for the first time on Monday, where we'll invite everyone to have an open discussion and collaboration. It's an open meeting, so anyone is welcome to attend, and all the dates and links will go in the chat in a minute. We've also got our big main event coming up soon, which is Challenging Care Decisions. That takes place on the 9th of June. And we've also got a webinar on personal health budgets and CHC funding on the 25th of June. And our next peer support session takes place on the 11th of June. But I want to pass today to Emma. We're really pleased to be joined by both Emma Fernandez and James Collip today, but I'll start by passing to Emma.
Thanks so much, Jade. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining today. And a big thank you to Jade and the ILG community for organising this today. So I'm Emma Fernandez and I work for the Department for Health and Social Care. And I work in the Adult Social Care Charging Policy team. And I also lead on the Direct Payments Policy. I'm joined with Harriet Millichamp, and she is one of the Charging Policy team leads, and also joined with James Collip from HMRC. So before we jump in, just some quick logistics. We have about 10 minutes at the end to answer some questions. And as I'm sure you'll all have seen on the invite, just to reiterate, both James and I are unable to answer any personal questions or provide any opinions on specific cases, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But there will be the opportunity to provide thoughts and comments after the webinar via a feedback form from myself. So the way we're planning to run this session is to split it into two. So you'll have to listen to me talk at you for 30 minutes, so many thanks in advance for that. And then I'll hand over to James and it'll come back to us both for some questions. So the aim of my part of the session is to really share the policy intention of direct payments direct from DHSC. What we hear is working well, what we hear isn't working as well, and what we're trying to do about it. So I will just wait a minute for the slides and then we can get going. Thank you very much, Harriet. Next slide, please. So to understand the current policy intention, it's helpful to first go back to the beginning and look at the very basics of a direct payment. So again, more apologies in advance. I'm aware that I am speaking to a room full of direct payment experts, and I'm sure you're all very well versed in everything I'm about to talk about today. So as we know, direct payments are monetary payments, and these are made to people to meet some or all of their eligible care and support needs. They allow greater personalisation, choice, and control over how a person meets their needs by allowing people or their representative to arrange their own care. They are intended to be used flexibly and innovatively and creatively, and they may be used to pay for services which the local authority may not typically commission. They have also been in use since the 1990s, and they do remain to be the government's preferred mechanism for providing personalised care. So when it comes to actually requesting a direct payment, the gateway to receiving one is very much, it must always be through the local authority making the information available, and then from a person requesting to receive one. And it's also important to note that local authorities mustn't force people to take one or to be placed in a situation where it's the only way to receive personalised care and support. And although most requests will occur during the care planning stage, a request can be made at any time, and local authorities must consider requests at any time and have clear and swift processes in place to respond. Next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So when it comes to exactly what a direct payment can be spent on, in a nutshell, there are 3 key points I like to consider. 1, is it legal and lawful? 2, does it meet the person's eligible need or needs? And lastly, does it help to achieve their outcomes that are outlined in the care and support plan? So there is no set list of what a direct payment can be used for, because this would completely contradict the purpose of a direct payment to be used flexibly, innovatively and creatively. We also know that there is a common narrative that direct payments are mostly just for hiring a personal assistant, and that this narrative is often adopted by local authorities. Now, although it's true that direct payments can be used to hire PAs, and many people do, it is important to remember that that's not all direct payments can be used for. So, as you know, other things that direct payments can be used for: respite care, transport costs, music therapy, one-off equipment such as an electrical bed. And the things that a direct payment can't be used for, this is a much, much shorter list. And essentially, it's anything that's already free, NHS services, illegal activity, and anything which doesn't support well-being. So to rewind a little bit, just to look at how we've got to where we are and how the legal framework and the intention has developed over time, I wanted to look back at the law itself. And I appreciate it can be a bit techie to understand, so I'll try my very best to set out exactly where the government's position has kind of come from. So it would be a miss not to recognise that the legislation to enable local authorities to make direct payments to disabled people really was the result of a long struggle by disabled people. And then first introduced in 1996 was the Community Care Direct Payments Act, which came into effect in 97. And initially, this was limited to 18 to 65-year-olds with specific impairments, such as learning disabilities and mental health conditions. So the aim of this legislation was to empower people and to promote independent living by giving them control over their care. This then evolved in 2000, and along came the Carers and Disabled Children Act, which extended eligibility to carers, parents of disabled children, and to 16 and 17-year-olds. Also, not mentioned on the slide, but in 2001, the Health and Social Care Act, which came into effect 2003, also made it mandatory and made it a mandatory duty on all local authorities to offer direct payments to any eligible person requesting one. And this leads us on to where we are now. So along came the Care Act and its regulations in 2014, in which one of the themes was really to increase independence, choice and control for service users and their carers by allowing them and giving them the opportunity to arrange their own care. The regulations itself expanded the eligibility criteria, allowing a broader range of people to access direct payments, and they also introduced more flexible use. So the Care Act shifted from kind of providing services more to meeting needs. So it allowed a personal budget to be taken by a direct payment, and that direct payment to then be spent on services and equipment which met their assessed needs. So the 1996 and 2000 Acts did empower people. It gave them control over their care, but the scope and flexibility was quite limited. And then by the time we get to 2014, the policy intention had shifted towards a more holistic and a more inclusive approach. And the Care Act itself promoted quite predominantly well-being, as well as also preventing the need for care. So the shift really reflected a move towards more person-centred, consistent and integrated care, and enhancing the support that was available. And today, this does remain to be the policy intention, and they do remain to be the government's preferred mechanism, and they are intended to be used flexibly and innovatively. So the driving force behind the policy is really this big push towards personalised care and giving disabled people more independence, choice and control. So where the policy intention currently sits in law now is obviously at the bottom we have the Care Act, which is the foundation, and that sets out the guidelines for direct payments. And the goal is to really give people that control and that flexibility over their care. Next, we have the regulations, which hold all that further detail. And then we have Chapter 12 in the Care and Support Statutory Guidance. And this outlines all the general principles for assessing needs and managing payments. But most importantly, it allows local authorities to decide how best to implement the principles based on local circumstances and individual cases. So that approach of granting local authorities the discretion is supposed to ensure that direct payments can be personalised, they can be adapted to meet each unique needs of each person. So next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So we know the policy intention and the law around direct payments, but what does this really mean for local authorities themselves? And ultimately, it's the responsibility of local authorities to interpret the law and the guidance to go set their own policies and procedures themselves. And there are many things that a local authority must do, and these are some of the things that we think local authorities must embed into those procedures that they create. And also, when in doubt, whether that's the local authority themselves or the user, anyone can refer to the legislation or statutory guidance to clarify exactly what responsibilities a local authority may or may not have. So firstly, looking at assessment and eligibility, we know that local authorities must assess people to determine if they have care and support needs, and then they must make any appropriate decisions. When it comes to information and support, local authorities must provide clear information about how direct payments work, including the responsibility of managing the payments, and they should also offer support services to help people manage the direct payments effectively. Local authorities, they do also have a crucial role to play in promoting the use of direct payments and helping people to make requests to receive one. Next, looking at setting up payments. So once a decision on eligibility has been made, the local authority themselves are responsible for setting up the direct payment. So including the calculating the amount of the personal budget and ensuring the payments are made regularly. So just to pause there, so this setting up payments, this is an example of this isn't set out in law. There is no set way for a payment to be set up. There is no set process. And this is an example of how the local authority, this is something for the local authority to do themselves, but keeping the principles and rules and regulations outlined in legislation in mind. Next, looking at monitoring and review. So we know that local authorities must regularly monitor how the direct payment is being used to make sure that they're meeting the person's care and support needs. And this can also include reviewing the arrangement as regularly as necessary and making any relevant changes. When it comes to sufficiency, the amount of the direct payment itself comes from the personal budget, which is set out in the care and support plan, and it must be an amount which is sufficient to meet the needs that the local authority has a duty to meet. And last but certainly not least, looking at flexibility and choice, local authorities must allow people the flexibility to use their direct payments in a way that best meets their needs, all while ensuring compliance with any relevant guidelines and regulations. So overall, any process and procedure involved should really include very minimal elements to allow, one, the local authority to fulfil its duties set out in law, but they also mustn't, in doing so, they mustn't restrict choice, they mustn't stifle innovation, or place excessive burden on a user to provide information. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know that this doesn't always happen as well as we'd like in practice. However, at this stage, we don't want to change the policy intention because our understanding is that it can work really well, and we hear from those with lived experience about how direct payments are and they can be positive for personalisation and independence. We do also know that there are really good pockets of good practice across the country of real effective quality use of a direct payment. And this doesn't necessarily mean high uptake, but what it does mean is quality use of however many direct payments are being taken up. So as much as we'd love to see a huge increase in direct payments and a lot of evidence to show that, we really want to focus on quality rather than quantity. But if quantity happens to be quality, that's also a great win. So we hear some really good stories through directly speaking to users themselves, so through workshops, community events, and any kind of open forums. We hear directly from local authorities themselves, including those who are really making a conscious effort to significantly improve, and also bigger organisations such as the Independent Living Group and Think Local, Act Personal. So what local authorities themselves tell us is that they know direct payments can improve outcomes for people because they allow, one, for more personalised care, two, they can reduce costs to the local authority because sometimes they can be much more cost effective than a commission service, and lastly, they can also reduce the person's need for future services or more expensive services in the longer run. So last year we visited Greenwich and they took us through how they'd kind of improved their direct payment offer, their direct payment practice, and as a result of that, they said that they'd seen a reduction in GP use and fewer mental health crises after increasing uptake as a result of improving the awareness and practice. In Hertfordshire, we hear that micro enterprises paid for through a direct payment can offer significant value for money, as sometimes they can be between £4 to £10 an hour cheaper than commission care. And obviously, the exact figures for each care service in each different location will always differ. So I definitely don't. The £4 to £10 figure may not be reflective of your local area or another. We also hear in Suffolk, a person received commission care for years and years, but making a one-off payment for an assistance dog resulted in no need for long-term services or a direct payment. So all of these snippets of success stories that we hear, obviously there's a lot more nuance to them, but it goes to show that there are many ways a direct payment can be effective, not just for the user themselves, but also for the local authority. And these successes, they also fit our overall strategic narrative at the department, because we're working on prevention, community care, and personalisation. But I will touch on that in a bit more detail shortly. Next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So we know there is good direct payment practice across the country. We think the law itself is clear, and there are many, many more success stories, but there are still very many challenges. I joined the department last August, and since then, I've, in a nutshell, kind of tried to throw myself into the direct payment world, and try hear from as many people as possible, especially those with real lived experience. So working with bigger organisations such as the Independent Living Group, Think Local Act Personal, as well as the National Association of Financial Assessment Officers. I've also tried to attend as many local workshops as possible and hearing from people through direct payment networks, but I definitely still don't know everything. You're all very much the experts here, and hopefully you'll agree with me that these are some of the correct key challenges that I've picked out. So to begin with, I think first and foremost, we hear most predominantly about the lack of flexibility and support around direct payments. So we hear from users that local authorities can be overly restrictive, and they do stifle creativity and innovation because they don't allow a direct payment to be spent in a certain way. We also hear a lot about very bureaucratic processes. So the step-by-step process of a direct payment, typically, although it will vary from different area to area, it typically involves many teams. There's a financial team involved, the social worker, the direct payment team. So it creates quite a fragmented process, and it's not as streamlined as it could be. We also hear a lot about how the financial monitoring process itself, so the checking receipts, the bank statements, they're time consuming for the local authorities, but they can also be extremely difficult for the user themselves. There can be a lot of fear there, a lot of trepidation around it, a lot of worry. We also hear a lot about the reluctance to offer or promote direct payments. So they're very much seen as a more hassle than it's worth. There's a lot of admin burden, and we just don't have the resources available to even think about looking at direct payments. And we also hear quite a lot about, in general, the challenges in just understanding and managing a direct payment. So not all local authorities have readily available support to give users, and this can make it a quite confusing, daunting process for the user themselves. So what can I spend it on? Will they reclaim this? Am I going to get in trouble for doing this? We don't want there to be that kind of fear there, and that's something we hear quite a lot. And last but not least, a real difficulty hiring and retaining personal assistants due to workforce shortages, the cost of living, and we also hear quite a bit about setting PA rates. So the law doesn't say to set a PA rate, but equally it doesn't say not to. But what we hear is that rates can be set at quite low rates, and they're not remotely in line with the skill set required of a typical PA. So these challenges all have varying causes, but another key challenge that I'd like to focus on is the real lack of data we have. So we don't have a lot of data on direct payments, and this can make it quite tricky for us to make informed policy decisions to improve the existing policy and how it's being implemented. So all we know is how many people are in receipt of a direct payment, but nothing about what they're being spent on, if they're being used effectively, how much people's individual personal budgets are. So high uptake in an area, we can't be sure either way if they're all quality use of a direct payment. Next slide, please, Harriet. So what are we doing about this? What are we doing about the lack of data? So to begin with, we have a research project with the King's Fund who are looking into the barriers around the uptake of direct payments and to get a better understanding of exactly how they're being used, what's preventing people from taking up a direct payment, what all them different factors may be, and this will give us a sense of what we may need to do from central government to help local authorities. It will also have an advisory board made up of many direct payment experts to make sure that the research is co-produced and is as impactful as possible. Next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So further to the research, we do hear and we feel quite an overwhelming support for the CARE Act and direct payment policy intention, but definitely not the same support for how it's being implemented in some areas. So this is where we want to focus on figuring out how we can improve. So we quite frequently hear from users about their challenges with their local authority and how they're interpreting and applying the law around direct payments. So we really want to learn more about exactly how we can and how local authorities want us to support them in their direct payment practice. So as I mentioned previously, at the moment, the Minister's priorities fall into three main areas. So firstly, prevention, second of all, community care, and lastly, personalisation. So what we're doing is we're really trying to champion direct payments internally as the ministers continue to develop the wider strategies and figuring out what they want to do in this space. And we're trying to focus on linking direct payments to these three key areas. So we're planning to work with the chief social worker who recently joined, and she's very keen on direct payments, and she's been helping us develop some options for promoting direct payments. We're also creating links with the independent commission team to keep them up to date and badger them of the enormous potential of direct payments. So for anyone who may not be aware, the independent commission is an independent commission set up being led by Baroness Louise Casey, and it will report direct to the Prime Minister. And it's really looking into adult social care and seeing how we can transform it, how we can reform it to make sure it's fit for purpose for the future. It will draw on experiences from people with real lived experiences, disabled people's organisations, and many, many more. So we're quite hopeful that we have these links available, so we can definitely keep badgering them about keeping direct payments in the loop. So overall, we're not looking to change the policy. Instead, we just want to support local authorities in their application of the policy. And we're also exploring exactly how to do that with Think Local, Act Personal to make sure our ideas are co-produced and they are most effective. So next slide, please, Harriet. Thank you. So this is where we would be really grateful for your expertise. So we have this data gap, so we really want to hear directly from you, people with lived experience. If you want to share, we really want to hear about your experience of direct payments, both positive and effective uses of direct payments, so any success stories, no matter how big or how small, we want to hear them all. Any challenges you face, any problems you've come up against, and also anyone who is from a local authority in particular, we'd love to hear more if you have any data on direct payments. So although we do want numbers, anecdotal data about your own experience is still very, very rich for us and helpful when we're speaking to ministers about the benefits of direct payments. We are very happy to anonymise anything at all, anonymise any stories if that would make you feel more comfortable. And if that is the case, please do just reference that on the feedback form. So the feedback form will be available after the session. Jade is very kindly going to send an email out with it. So I hope that has given everyone a better insight into direct payment policy intention and where we're currently at with it. And thank you very much for letting me talk at you non-stop for the past 25 minutes. I will now hand over to James Collip from HMRC.
Just sorting out our tech.
Yeah, sorry about that. There we go. Thank you, Harriet. Right there. Hopefully you can see me okay and hear me okay. Good afternoon. I'm James Collip. I'm from HMRC. I'm a policy advisor on employment status for tax. I'm just going to speak to you about that this afternoon. So I'll start the slides off. So what is employment status for tax? it's not a matter of choice. So it's employment status is not a matter of choice. It depends on the contract and actual working arrangements under which people provide their work. So you're either employed or you're self-employed. They're the two statuses. And the determination of that is based on a range of factors set out in case law. The government does not define employment status for tax purposes in legislation. Employment status is important because it affects the amount of income tax and national insurance the worker will have to pay. The employer is also going to pay employers national insurance when there is an employed position, and possibly apprenticeship levy and pension contributions as well. Someone who is classified as self-employed will receive their pay without any of these deductions or contributions having been made. It is a responsibility for them to register with HMRC for payment of the tax and the NICs due on the self-employment situation. So what is false self-employment? This is where someone may have been pushed into the wrong tax regime. So we've got a failure, potentially a failure for the operation of PAYE. This results in the employer, who could be the care recipient, the agency or the labour provider, being charged for underpaid tax and national insurance contributions. Workers may fall into false self-employment due to a lack of knowledge, or they could be pushed into it by labour seekers or providers seeking to save on labour costs. Often it is low-paid workers who find themselves incorrectly in the self-assessment tax reporting regime, exposing them to unnecessary obligations with the risk of error and penalties. If a worker who should be regarded as an employee denied payments, they were entitled to include the national minimum wage and holiday pay. So there's potential loss of employment rights, and there are other employment rights that the worker is losing out on. So very important the classification is correct, and the implications are there for the rights as well as the tax. Just to focus on social care in the UK, some figures from the recent social care reports, some fairly large figures here: 68.1 billion of economic activity in England in 23-24 from social care activities, and an estimated wage bill 27.9 billion. So we're talking some pretty sizable figures there. And skills for care predicted in 2021, that's almost 500,000 additional jobs required in the adult social care going forwards. And you can see some figures there, and some very important underlying figures that support the position that we need to take into account here what's happening in this sector. So full self-employment's made a lot of headlines over the years. Here's some of the headlines that have been made in the media. Just give you a few seconds to digest some of those. So we're aware of the big issue, and the media is obviously reporting on it as well. Some of them are not always social care, but it's cross sectors. Okay, and Matthew Taylor and Dame Margaret Beales have made some comments there as being directors of Labour Market Enforcement, which is DBT, Department of Business and Trade. As you can see, they're very concerned about some of the practices going on in the care sector, and attempts to get compliance improved. So I'll just leave that slide in there so you can read. Okay, and there's a selection of current government guidance here. There's a lot of links here. I'll just touch on the top couple there. So there's one from the Employment Status Manual there, which is available on gov.uk, specifically tailored for care workers and care receivers. It will depend on, as I say, the factors in employment. In terms of employment, self-employment will depend on the working practices and the conditions which the arrangement is made. So I'd suggest reading that one as an sort of a good introduction to employment status in care workers. There's also the employment status for tax digital service, which is CEST, which is a very good tool for you to check the scenario. Make sure, I'd recommend you keep the contracts and or the agreements are in the audit trail there to support what you're putting into the tools. HMRC will stand by the decision as long as the information put into it is accurate and followed our guidance. There's numerous other government departments there and sections which provide help and support. So I'd invite you to have a look at those links when you have the opportunity. And I think we're over to questions now, Emma.
Thank you very much, James. So I've just had a quick skim through the chat, and rest assured, if we don't get around to answering your question, or it's maybe something we can't answer, do feel free to add it into the feedback form, leave any details if you wish, and if it's something we can get in touch with, I can definitely try my best too. So I did see a comment about, I believe it could have been from a local authority perspective, but please do shout if I'm wrong, about how you're only allowed to pay national minimum wage, or that's what I took from it anyway. I think this is quite a difficult position, so we do appreciate that the fiscal situation is very challenging, and in the latest spending review, the government took into consideration the wider challenges around adult social care, and they've made more funding available and some additional grants available. But any kind of more specifics, I'm terribly sorry I wouldn't be able to answer too much on. I've seen another query about PAs, about checking whether they're self-employed or not. James, would you know the answer to that? How would a person be able to check if their PA is a genuine self-employed PA?
Well, if you're engaging with a single, an individual, it's your responsibility to check the employment status for tax position. So it wouldn't necessarily mean anything to get the UTR reference from the individual because they may be self-employed for another engagement. So it's if you're approaching it from a direct engagement with an individual, to follow the guidance that's published on HMRC's website, which follows the case law, and use the CESS tool to check the position. So you shouldn't be relying on the person's potential tax position in another area because it's a case by case basis.
Thanks, James. I saw the question from Jade about the policy around what support must be provided and at what level. So I think this kind of comes down to it set out in law, as we discussed earlier. Local authorities, they have to give sufficient information. There is no definition, unfortunately, for what sufficient is in this case. And I think for those who are struggling with a local authority who maybe they don't feel like are getting sufficient information, it's a real shame that, first of all, that is the case, because that definitely shouldn't be the case, and it's definitely worth challenging, although I appreciate that's not something you should have to challenge because it should be available, but yet there's no set list of exactly how much a local authority should give. And I think this principle probably generally comes down to it being local authorities having this discretion to decide what's best for their locality, their area, and the people in their specific area with specific needs. So in situations where you feel like you didn't have enough information, I would definitely challenge the local authority and request more. For example, if they aren't able to offer a support service in-house, they definitely should be signposting you to places that can offer you that support service. And I do sympathise with some of the comments under your question, Jade, especially when it comes to unpaid family carers. But I'm terribly sorry. There's just no set list.
Can I just also add on that, because I know Jade's point about the postcode lottery is something we hear a lot about, and that's like outside direct payments as well. That's not specific to that, and I think that's one of the things I think will be really important for the independent commission to explore, and has been something that we've already mentioned to them, in terms of being kind of one of the big challenges in the sector. Because I think that it's a really good point, and it's something, as I say, it's something we see all the time. But I think it's a much bigger much bigger question. Sorry, my laptop's flashed. Sorry. Beyond kind of just direct payments, it's a much bigger kind of challenge within the whole system.
I think on that point as well, I can see Helen in the chat has said, what responsibility do you think the local authority should have around supporting people about what they need to do? I think this is probably something that we would want to continue looking into. So as I mentioned, we're currently exploring how we can work with Think Local, Act Personal to figure out how we can support local authorities in interpreting the law and interpreting the guidance better, to make people have more effective direct payments. And I think the support services and information side of things is definitely something we could take a look into. I think it'd be hard to judge for myself exactly what that would be. And so working with TLAP and we need to work with TLAP and local authorities themselves to figure out exactly what they want us to do as well, and exactly what they would like us to kind of to set out, really. I've seen another question about CQC marking on direct payments. As far as I'm aware, I know that CQC have been placing a bit more of a spotlight on direct payments. It's not always direct payments isn't always looked at in every CQC inspection, but when they come through, they're on an ad hoc basis, whether they've been referred to or not. And I believe that the CQC policy team are exploring whether they should have I don't think it would be direct payments per se, but maybe more of a personalisation and choice and control element, and maybe having that as a theme. But that's something that's kind of still being figured out and still being explored on the CQC policy side. A few more questions on PAs. I'll just quickly see if Harriet and James can still hear us. James, I think we have a few interesting questions on PA specifically in HMRC. Let me see which one we can pass over. I'm not too sure who this is, but someone's mentioned that they've developed a PA rates tool in Sheffield. That sounds very interesting. So it'd be really great if you could share that tool. And thanks to Helen for popping in your contact details. Let me see if we've got any more direct payment questions. I'll just give Harriet and James a minute to... Oh, I think they've gone. They've left me. I can collate the questions for James and maybe send them back through to you, Jade, if that's okay, and maybe you could disseminate them that way. Yep. I can maybe get some answers from James to send them back through. But if anyone has any more questions on direct payments, please do feel free to shout or pop them in the chat if that's easier.
Emma, I know a lot of people are struggling with the recent national insurance rises. I know this might not be something you can answer directly, but a lot of councils seem to not be automatically putting the increases into budgets. Are you aware if there should be policy saying they should be doing this without it being requested, as it's a national change?
No, I wouldn't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. But that is definitely something we can ask our market shaping and funding team about. So I can ask the policy team about that and send that back through to you. So just so I've understood right, so the increases aren't being kind of automatically put into the budgets. Is that right?
Yeah, so obviously there's been the national insurance increase for everyone, but some people, there's been quite a lot of comments on our Facebook page that not all councils have automatically put that in the budget, and that doesn't seem right when we've all got to pay them. So yeah,
Fab. Thanks, Jade. Yeah, I'm sorry, I wouldn't know the answer to that, but thanks for the question. I can send that on and get back to you. I've seen a question from Jackie about, can a direct payment be paid into a designated bank account or on a prepaid card, but often that choice isn't offered. Can this be challenged? Yes, I think every decision with the local authority can definitely be challenged. So the guidance itself doesn't say it must be one or the other. It can be either or, and it can be other options as well. So I would definitely speak to a local authority about that. And if you would prefer to receive your direct payment one way rather than another, it's definitely something you can challenge with the local authority. And on that point as well, I think this is where there's that kind of postcode lottery as well of practices. So the neighbouring local authority may have completely different direct payment practices, but every local authority is supposed to be following the same guidelines to create this very similar policies. Obviously, one local authority policy could never be identical to another, but the general principles, especially around flexibility, which the prepaid card and bank account would fall under, should definitely be key. So yeah, that's definitely challengeable. A few more HMRC questions which I can share with James. When it comes to Daniel, thanks for your question. So just so everyone can see, it's a question about client contributions. So a person has a financial assessment to figure out how much they can pay. Most will pay, but some flat out refuse to pay, even though they've signed an agreement. What powers do we have to deal with this? And can we stop the direct payment? Or do we have to provide a continuation of care regardless? I think this technically would err potentially on the side of being potentially specific. So I wouldn't want to say with too much certainty, but again, every local authority's policies around the agreements and around care would be different. But generally speaking, I would say continuation of care would need to continue, as there's that duty in the Care Act to provide care where necessary, where it's being deemed appropriate for the local authority and they have that duty to provide care. We hear actually a lot about debt obviously in adult social care and around direct payments, and we're doing some policy scoping into debt and what powers the local authority needs that they maybe don't have right now to kind of recover that debt. And that's something we have raised with the independent commission team as something we'd like them to look into. So sorry. Yeah, of course, Jade, jump in.
Emma. I just want to say, obviously, we all understand people have to pay care charges. However, if you're deemed to, not that everyone has to pay a contribution, but a lot of our members come along to our meetings absolutely desperate over the fees they're being charged. We've had people cry in meetings about the fact what do they choose to pay this month, their heating bill or their care charges. Many of our members also don't know about disability-related expenses, and councils are not telling people about them and not correctly assessing them. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, everyone should be paying their care charges. People's finances are so stretched, and it feels like such a punishment often that, I know as councils you can't always help this, but, it is a choice for councils to have to pay care charges. We already know benefits are stretched to the absolute limit. So maybe I know it's easy for me to say, but maybe there should be some compassion about those people struggling to pay rather than trying to remove their care charges. And also, have they been signposted correctly to look at disability related expenses, and have they been fairly assessed before you go down that route, just from our point of view.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Jade. And in the Care and Support Statutory Guidance, when it refers to debt in one of the annexes, I believe it's either Annex A or Annex D, the principles around debt recovery very much focus on, first and foremost, try speak with the person and figure out exactly what's going wrong, and is that support available. And it's not necessarily a jump straight to recovering debt or taking someone to county court or anything. There are a lot of steps a local authority should be going through first, and like you say, Jade, compassion and considering well-being is paramount in those principles. Just quickly on DRE, so as within the charging policy team, we're very well aware that there are huge problems with DRE, and there is also an ongoing research project on DRE. So we know that every local authority has a different policy, or in some cases, some don't have any at all. So we have undertaken the first couple of phases in that research. So myself and a team of some other people, we analysed every single local authority's policies, the non-residential charging policies and the DRE policies, all lack thereof. And we're in a stage of creating and doing kind of some thematic review on that and kind of figuring out exactly what the picture is. Again, we hear quite a lot of anecdote stories, which are still very good and very rich for us in order to share with ministers, but the research just backs that up a little bit further with some numbers, and that's something that we've also raised with the independent commission team as a big focus we would like them to look at, and so for all these kind of ideas, so when it comes to debt, direct payments, DRE, because the independent commission is ongoing and they're looking at what they can do in adult social care, we are briefing them on any and all topics in the charging space. And although the independent commission team is up and running, they're still figuring out exactly what that means and what they want to look into. So in the charging team, we're on a bit of a mission to, we want them to take all our notes really and run with them. Obviously, there are a lot of things in adult social care that are worthy and need to be looked into, but specifically in charge, I think DRE is really key, especially as you mentioned, Jade, about the DWP benefit reforms. It's very distressing, it's very worrying, very confusing for people. So also, just very quickly on that point, again, as the charging team, we've been working with DWP and analysts and the joint health and DWP teams to really figure out exactly what the various impacts could be. So there are some obvious impacts, and we want to make sure that, there are no groups of people that fall through the cracks that we haven't considered. So our analysts are doing some mapping work at the moment to figure out exactly who may or may not be affected by the changes, and we're hoping that whatever there are some measures that DWP is still consulting on, but we're hoping that we can kind of hopefully feed into that to maybe lessen any impacts where there may be some. Helen, I've just seen your point on DWP about when we're considering issues and threats to DWP benefit changes. I'm not sure what our timescales for that would be. At the moment, I think it's more high level teams kind of like working to map impacts before kind of diving into anything. So I wouldn't be able to put a date or if things would be shared. I know there is various impact assessments that are available now. So sorry, I can't be a bit more specific about that. Ed, I've just seen your message as well about what should be the process for care assessment and getting hours. And employing someone for a few hours a week can be very difficult. I do completely sympathise with that. It's very difficult, and it is something we hear quite a lot, especially more in rural areas. So that would be something, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, it would be something that we would be working with other policy teams with, and working with the independent commission team to look at. As obviously personal assistance it's not just relevant to like direct payments policy, it's relevant to workforce policy and many others. But the actual process itself, again, this comes down to the specific local authority and exactly what their set policy and procedure says to do. My kind of general advice around that would be to look at your individual local authorities and see what their policies and procedures say, and if they're doing something that's in contradiction to that, or if their policy's in contradiction to what the regulations set out, it's definitely worth challenging.
Emma, sorry, should each local authority have their policies on their website easily findable?
They should do. They should have all the policies available. However, when we were undertaking our research, analysing all the policies, a lot of them we couldn't actually find. And now they may have been on there, but the point is they shouldn't be hard to find. They should be readily available. So if they're not on the website, I would also challenge a local authority and ask them this, contact them and ask for them, because that's something that would fall under, I suppose, kind of the information and support kind of principle. They should be making information and all that information necessary readily available.
That's fine. It's the same thing I'm doing with the ICBs with their policies with PHPs. So I'll send them an FOI request.
Yeah. Louise, I've just seen your message about, so I keep saying message, I mean comments, about paying direct payments net or gross. I think, again, it falls to an individual local authority to decide how they would like to do it. We did hear recently from Hackney, who had been paying direct payments, but in general, they'd been paying, I believe it is net, I always get them mixed up, in order to minimise debt, so they pay more, but again, it's one for the local authority to answer.
Yeah, Emma, sorry, we're back. I'm really sorry that
No worries.
I've got a terrible laptop. The CAS guidance has a bit about net or gross, and it says that it's for local authorities to decide, but it does sort of say any local authorities that aren't, if they're not doing it net, might want to consider the benefits of doing it net, because it helps with reducing kind of transaction costs and kind of process costs. But yeah, Emma's right that it is up to the local authority, but that's the sort of thing that really local authorities should consult on when they're designing their processes.
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. So I think a lot of the questions so far, I appreciate it can be quite frustrating, because a lot of the answers typically fall to it depends. It depends on each local authority and the specific policies and procedures they have in place, and we know that there's this inconsistency, and we know there's this kind of postcode lottery of best practice. So that is something we're very well aware of, and we're very keen to explore further when we're figuring out exactly how we can reinvigorate and promote direct payments, and with that specific focus on exactly how we can support local authorities to better interpret the guidance into their practices and procedures. I appreciate it is 3:00 now, and many of you may be very bored of my voice by now, but I know we've got quite a few HMRC questions, so as I mentioned, I'm happy to kind of take them away. James can take a look, and we can send the answers through to Jade, and Jade will also very helpfully, if you haven't already got it, the link to the feedback form, where we'd love to hear more about direct payments. So in the interest of time, I appreciate people may have other places to be. So just a very quick thank you for giving us your time for the past hour and listening to us speak. We appreciate your time, and we again recognise that you're all the real experts, not me. So thank you very much for all your support and helping me, especially since I only started last year. So thank you very much. I recognise a lot of familiar faces on the call. So I will quickly hand over to Jade.
Thank you, everybody. So I will send the recording of this will go out on our website. It can take up to a week, it just depends. And I will send out the slides. They're on the website already, and also the feedback form. So thank you so much for coming. It's really appreciated to see you all here. Don't forget to sign up to our other events. I've put them in the chat, but I'll just do so again so you've got them. But yeah, thank you very much.